Welcome to Senior Living Visionaries, a podcast for senior living leaders who are looking to stay ahead of the curve in the industry. On this show, we feature leaders and innovators in senior living who are pushing the boundaries and creating new, effective services and solutions. And now, let's settle in as host Jennifer Drago connects us with today's guests.
Hi, and welcome to Senior Living Visionaries, where we showcase the leaders and innovators who are shaping the future of senior living. We also talk a lot about good governance and how to build brilliant boards, because it's so important to the strategic direction and the competitive advantage that senior living organizations, but really all nonprofits, face. I'm your host, Jennifer Drago. I'm a strategy and governance consultant, and I'm CEO of Peak to Profit. And today we're going to talk more about board orientations. So the entire month of January, we are doing podcasts around board orientation and the different components of an effective board orientation. Many nonprofit fiscal years start in January, and so many of you have new board members that are starting this month, and we want to make sure that you have all the tools and resources that you need to set a strong foundation for these board members. Remember, a prepared board member is an effective board member. Why do we spend so much time talking about an intentional orientation process? Well, it's the key to providing initial education for that board member about the organization, the industry that you operate, and what your key strategic direction is, as well as your challenges, which helps them to better engage and better provide their expertise early on in their board term. It also promotes alignment among all the board members when you do this kind of orientation, because everybody has the same foundational knowledge as they move into their board term. Today we're going to talk specifically about board handbooks. And board handbooks are great to have reference materials at the fingertips of your board members so that they always have a clear understanding of their roles, responsibilities, and expectations. It also reduces their need to ask questions because they can always refer back to the facts of historical documents or reference materials that you provide, and it allows them to quickly, again, integrate and provide their expertise to the organization, providing a consistent framework for the governance of your organization. So what should be included in a board handbook? And let me first say, before we even talk about the components of a board handbook is part of a larger orientation process. So this is specifically like the reference guide. So think of it as the dictionary or the thesaurus for your board members. Your entire orientation process needs to be robust and comprehensive. Your board handbook is just a component of that board orientation. So my last episode was all about the components of an entire board orientation process. Now we're going to talk about one of the components of that, which is a board handbook. And a board handbook should never stand alone, and it should never comprise the entire orientation process for your new board members. So the very last thing I want you to do is have a new incoming board member and send them a link to a Google Drive or hand them a 3-inch thick binder full of documents and say, here's your orientation. Please go home and read this. And expect them to be fully prepared to be a board member. That should never happen. So certainly we can provide the handbook as part of an orientation meeting that we host and allow folks to read that in advance and bring questions and maybe even highlight some of the documents that are in that handbook during the orientation. But we certainly do not want the handbook to be the orientation itself. It is a component and not a standalone component. So I've probably said enough there. I'm going to step off my soapbox and tell you more about what should be included in a board handbook. So the first thing you want to include usually is a welcome letter and an overview of what the handbook includes and why we provide it. Also a table of contents. That's pretty simple at the beginning. One of your first sections of the board handbook would be an organizational overview. So in that section, you would provide your mission, vision, and values, a brief history of the nonprofit, your strategic plan, as well as any annual goals that they have for the year. And maybe that section, the annual goals, can be one that they change out each year so that they always have the most current annual goals available to them in a pinch. And again, that can be digitally or physically. And you might say, well, which one should I do? Well, you might, if you're well equipped to serve your board members in this way, you could give each board member an option, because certainly some are more accustomed to having paper documents and some may prefer to have electronic. I definitely would do electronic regardless, and then maybe provide the printed version for folks who really feel the need for that. The second section of the handbook that I would recommend is one that speaks to the board member responsibilities and expectations. So in this area, you could have a code of conduct that describes the behavioral expectations as well as their ethical guidelines. That code of conduct may also include attendance expectations, or that may be in a separate document. And then I would have part of that code of conduct or a separate sheet that they sign each year about their responsibilities as board members. So this would clearly define their fiduciary, fundraising, governance, advocacy expectations, whatever is appropriate for your board members. Set the expectations right up front and make sure that they have a written document, again, that they sign ideally, so that they are saying, I'm going to commit to these expectations and to this code of conduct. So this can be different documents that they sign, or they can all be combined into one. The next section that I would recommend is on governance documents themselves. So provide a copy of the Articles of Incorporation, as well as the bylaws of the organization, the most currently stated bylaws, because we know that those are revised and changed from time to time. I would provide key policies for the board, such as conflict of interest, whistleblower, confidentiality policies. And again, these are going to be policies that they likely are going to sign on an annual basis to keep that front of mind for them. I would give them committee charters so that if they're asked to be on a committee, they know what that committee does and specifically what its responsibilities are and what their role is as a committee member. So those are governance documents. Then in the next section, I would include key operational information. This is operations of the board. So I would probably include a meeting schedule, so the calendar for the year. I would include maybe a board structure chart, so like an org chart for your board that talks about the roles, the officers, the committees that report up to the board. Committee descriptions, again, may be helpful especially if they're asked to be on a committee or to select a committee in which they'd like to participate. Your staff contacts for them, so key staff contacts for your board, as well as a glossary of terms that are going to be appropriate to your industry, likely. And especially if we use acronyms, we want to include those in the glossary, because sometimes we confound new board members by using acronyms. The next section would be your financial overview. So if, again, they're coming in at the beginning of a fiscal year, likely, so you want to provide them with a budget for the year. And again, this might be in a section that they can change out that budget, or you can change out that budget if it's a digital document, so that they always have access to the budget. Your latest audited financial statements would want to be included, and then any financial policies that they need to be aware of. Next, you want to tell them about their board evaluation tools. So how does the board evaluate itself? What was the latest board survey or board assessment that was done? Do you have the results of that? And then how will they be assessed as an individual board member? So when they're due to renew their term, how will the governance committee take a look at them as a board member and know how to rank their engagement, their contribution, their participation as a board member? Then we might also provide a section, kind of like a bibliography, if you will, of resources that they can access or continuing education. So recommended reading that they might undertake related to our industry or the industry sector. Some industry links are their websites that they can always go, or newsletters that they can sign up for to be better educated of current trends and issues in our industry sector. And are there any training opportunities that are available to them? So for example, if we want them to be great board members, we might make available to them a governance website that has a number of resources on it. My favorite is BoardSource. So BoardSource has a lot of free resources on it, but you can also become a paid member and get access to their paid resources, which are excellent and cover every single topic that a board member would need to be aware of. Some other optional appendices might include the organizational chart for the organization, the strategic plan document, although I would opt to include that for sure in your organizational overview. You might include the latest annual report for the organization. If you do a donor impact statement or an annual report of that sort, you could absolutely include that. If you do any reporting for grantors as well, that is a great resource to provide to your board. Oh, and one other thing that we didn't mention in the financial section that you would want to make sure they have access to is the latest Organization 990. Now remember, this is an IRS document and it is public, so anybody can see this for your nonprofit. Your board should absolutely be familiar with the latest 990, and in fact, they should be reviewing the 990 each year before it's filed. But again, we're talking about resources for incoming board members, so make sure they have access to your latest 990 that would be available. That's a lot of documents, right? And it could be seen as kind of cumbersome. Certainly the first time you organize it and put it together, it's going to be a chore. But each year updating just some of the key parts, I think, will be pretty easy, especially, again, if you provide that electronically or through a board portal. Make sure you integrate that manual as part of your onboarding process and make sure that your board members are familiar with it and know that these resources are available at their fingertips. Because sometimes, you've probably experienced this, a board member may say, I don't know where to find that. Well, if it's all in one place with a clearly labeled table of contents and you cover it in your orientation as well as your annual reorientation of board members, they're always going to know where to find those documents. So whose responsibility is it to put together the board handbook? Well, ideally it's the governance committee because they're going to oversee all of your orientation processes. So they should absolutely dictate the content. Now you can have an executive assistant or someone help to gather those resources and put them on a board portal. But somebody on the governance committee should be responsible for doing an annual review of the board handbook and making sure that all the key documents that need to be updated are updated as possible. And then you'll also want to include a process whereby board members can offer feedback to the governance committee about what else might be included in the board handbook. So maybe a new board member has been on the board for about a year and they say, gosh, I really wish that X, our fundraising plan would have been included in the board handbook because that would have been really helpful to refer back to throughout the year. Just keep that feedback open, that feedback loop open, and keep an open mind about what's in your board handbook. So I know it seems like a lot of work, but I promise once it's in place, it's going to be pretty easy to update and it's going to be an invaluable resource for your board members going forward. Again, a board handbook is a powerful tool to empower new board members and enhance your governance. You can start small. Maybe you don't start with a full checklist, but be intentional to create this resource because having a strong board with strong board members, that builds strong organizations. So this is the foundation for your brilliant board, and I encourage you to put together a board handbook. I want to offer to you a free resource that will be available in the show notes. It's a board orientation checklist. I've made it especially for you for 2025 for new board members. It includes a section on the board handbook, so everything that we just talked about will be mentioned there, and it will be a good reminder for you about how to provide this strong foundation for your newest board members. I hope you've enjoyed today's episode on building strong orientations and specifically board handbooks. I'm your host, Jennifer Drago, Strategy and Governance Consultant, governance consultant, and CEO of Peak to Profit. You've been listening to Senior Living Visionaries podcast, where we explore cutting-edge ideas and breakthroughs that are shaping the future of senior living, as well as those governance best practices to make sure you have the strongest and most effective board possible to support your organization. Please subscribe to be notified each time an episode drops at seniorlivingvisionaries.com. I want to thank you for listening, and I'll see you next time.
You've been listening to the Senior Living Visionaries podcast and radio show, where we showcase the leaders and innovators in the industry who are pushing the boundaries and setting the stage for the future in senior living and services. Join us next time as we share the bold ideas and breakthroughs of the industry's most forward-thinking leaders here on Senior Living Visionaries.